You're not going to find it in any meteorological textbook, but unusual weather usually means more unusual weather. Temperatures were getting up to the mid to upper 90s. In early May, something's wrong. Something is not right in the atmosphere. These thunderstorms had something to eat on, and it extended out a long ways into southern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And again, talk about temperatures in the mid to upper 90s. This thunderstorm's going to have plenty of fuel to go. The way you can imagine it is a self-perpetuating thunderstorm. You got cooler air that comes down because it rains. You feel the cool air rush over you, but then it launches more heat and moisture into the thunderstorm, which creates more rain, which creates more updraft, which creates more rain, and it keeps propagating forward. You have winds pushing this line of thunderstorms forward. And this was the point in the afternoon where I called you guys, because there's something called a bowing segment in front of this thunderstorm. That's a sign of very high winds. And I thought, this is May 12th, you got temperatures almost hitting 100 degrees ahead of this. This isn't good. Now, every windstorm is not a derecho. That's just the long-term, large-scale Super Bowl event of a series of thunderstorms. It has to be at least 400 miles in length and 60 miles width of a damage path. They're sometimes called the Witch of November. In the Midwest, in Illinois and Wisconsin, these are common during the spring and the fall time when you get into the Great Lakes region. But South Dakota, not so much, especially not in May. We get these long-winded thunderstorms, wind bags, as some meteorologists call them. You get these wind bags in July and August as the season begins to change a little bit, but not in May.
In this episode of Homegrown, we're going to dive into the details of the derecho that happened in eastern South Dakota on May 12th, 2022. We're going to talk to a few farmers and see some firsthand destruction on how powerful these storms can be.
My husband Brian and I have a feedlot here just west of Sioux Falls. We feed about 600 head of cattle and follow our two boys around.
We're on my family's farm, homesteaded in 1876. I'm fourth generation, working on raising the fifth.
You know, a little over a year ago, this terrible storm came through, which affected a whole lot of people in South Dakota. So that was beginning early May 2022. Just take us through that day a little bit, how that day went and how it unfolded as you know, before the storm and then during.
We saw the weather alert come in, and I was hiding my trucks and trailers and putting them inside. And when it hit, I often describe it a lot like if this would have happened 2,000 years ago in the right spot, we'd be read about in the Bible, because it was pretty widespread devastation. It was following me down the road, and the one building that wasn't locked up was this cattle shed behind us here. Overhead door was still open, so I pulled into it real quick to try to shut the door and just ride out the storm. As soon as I got into it, I took one step out, heard a creak, creak, boom. Then roof blew right off. You can see sky, and that was pretty short-lived because it just got engulfed in black.
We knew there was a storm coming, but we get random weird storms around here. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. We weren't getting that prepared for it. I was actually out on our front deck kind of videoing it, and then I don't know if it was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, all of a sudden it just got pitch black. And Brian was out in the barn. I said, boys, we got to get downstairs. And so we were in the basement. We had a brand new puppy at the time, and I was just trying not to get them scared. I was more worried about my new grill that we had just gotten on the back deck than anything else.
At that point, I jumped back in the car, in the truck, and tried to drive to the house without being able to see. Pieces of roof were hitting the back of the Tahoe, floating over, and I was driving over the top of it. And I didn't know if I had a house left. My wife and kids were in there. I walked into the house, kind of in a little panic, and Erin was doing a great job of keeping the kids calm. And she said, well, what's it like out there? I said, we don't have a feedlot anymore.
The boys were 6 and 8 at the time, and were afraid. So we were just trying to stay calm, just tried to kind of wait it out. Brian came out and checked a few times, and it looked like it got light. We came outside, and it was like our world was upside down.
So it was a very tense, very tense, the waiting and not knowing what's going to be left when you get out there. It was a really long half hour of my life. But just like that, the skies parted, it became a beautiful evening, and we just walked around slack-jawed, not sure what to do next.
My grill was still standing on the deck, but otherwise the rest of the farm looked really bad. The whole back end of the barn here had completely blown over. That was the first thing we'd see. And then we looked to the right, and our entire shed had fallen completely into the trees. There was just debris everywhere.
It was so widespread that we had producers that completely lost their barns to producers whose roofs were taken off of barns and everything in between, all the way across the state, all the way from the southeastern part of the state up to the northeastern part of the state. Primarily where the hogs are raised in the eastern half of the state is where the major devastation took place, but it was one of those things that you hope you never have to live through again. It just came so quickly, and couldn't be prepared any more for it than we were, and just have to endure those situations.
My wife and 3 adult kids were home. They'd been visiting for a part of a week. And they came running in, and our one daughter looked back out and saw our old trampoline rolling across the yard like a mouse wheel going across the yard. And so we all went down the basement, and not sure, how bad it was going to be. We could just hear, loud, and just not sure what was happening. And at one point, our son ran up and looked out the window and said, "The barn is gone." So there it was, right where we're standing, was our barn that was well over 100 years old. Our kids would play up in there and had small square bales and made forts and swung from ropes and had their friends over and did that. Prior to my time, it was used for milking. There were cattle in it, and it was used for a variety of things. It was a mainstay financially for the family, and so a long history that way as well. So yeah, it was tragic to lose something that you'd put a lot of time and effort in, but also is just a very historic piece, and it can't be duplicated.
Well, it had a profound effect kind of on that border-to-border strip of 30 to 50 miles that it was horrendous to. Certainly, you look at some feed yards, CAFOs that were milk barns torn apart. The way the producers got together and helped each other through some of that, I think it was very encouraging. They worked together to make sure that those animals were able to get milked. Animals had safe places to be, which was amazing. We still see that profound effect, though. You look at storage, of grain storage, there's a lot of bins that are still down in the creek and places like that, and they haven't been replaced yet. So it's been troubling. 2 years ago I didn't know what a derecho was, and now we all know what derechos are, and some people learned really the hard way. So it's frustrating, but there's also been some good stories come out of it too, how we pull together and help each other.
It looks like you found a home for for a lot of the things that you keep finding, little presents left for you here and there around the place.
Let's hope it's a temporary home. There's going to be a hole and a good bonfire here one of these days. Yeah, it's a constant reminder, that's for sure. I'm looking forward to the day when that's gone, but when you start working on a project like that, it's the next need, so it becomes a need-based more than a want-based, and no matter how much I want that pile to be gone, we had to get the barn ready first, and then when we were waiting, I mean, that storm hit so many people so hard.
Actually, a lot of my family lives in Castlewood, so they had a huge amount of damage up there. My stepdad's house was spared. He was just about a block off of where the main tornado went through, but that town up there is just amazing how they've come together. My aunt and uncle lost part of a hay shed. My cousin lost their entire garage, but they've all been rebuilding, and people up there have lost their entire houses. I heard one story of a family that were moving from California, and they closed on their house like that Tuesday. The dad was there closing on the house. It stored came on Thursday. And so his wife and kids were on their way up, and they got there and had nowhere to move to. So, I mean, you hear things like that, and you're like, well, we still got it pretty good. You know, we can come back from this. And I don't know what happened with them, but man, I saw the devastation up there, and just driving up towards Watertown and just the billboards down. And it's like, wow, this was a once in a lifetime, I hope, situation that people have to go through.
I heard a statement the other day that maybe 80% of the grain bins in the eastern side of South Dakota received some damage between the derecho of last year and subsequent windstorms. How do you, in a time when the steel is high and the builders are few, how do you replace that?
Around here, we saw some people lose sheds and stuff like that, but I don't feel like a lot of people lost homes. And so that's where we were lucky.
The owner of these cattle was here an hour after the storm, and we were preparing trucks to have them loaded up, and we worked all night long to try to get something so we could feed some of them, because they weren't going to have to go, or they were going to have to go. He said, unless you think you can get them fed, and I said, well, so far I've successfully fed 2 pens. We were having a feed trial at the time with another company running a different product through the machine, so we had managed pens for the previous 3 months based on this feed trial, control groups and test groups. And we were trying to figure out how we could possibly continue that feed trial, because we were also getting paid to do that. There's times that you thrive and times you just survive, and we spent the better part of 6-7 months just surviving.
I mean, everything else had to stop. We were trying to automate a lot more stuff. That just kind of had to stop, because we just had to get by. Right. We just had to get the cattle fed and make sure they were taken care of, and that was our main priority. So now that we're coming out of it a little bit, hopefully things like that will pick up again, but we just had to survive. We actually had to tear the entire barn down from the cement up. So we were able to make a lot of adjustments. Brian was able to adjust how we wanted the catwalk, how we wanted the conveyor to be. We got a brand new conveyor that's a lot nicer than the one we had before. We learned from feeding for a couple of years and what we had. Now we were able to do it the way we wanted to. And same with the shed that blew over. We were able to put it back up. Instead of trying to make do with what we had, we put it back up the way we want to have it for the next 20 years and on. So it's one of those things, it's like, man, this really sucked, but it's going to be so much better going forward.
We made a lot of things better in a lot of ways because we had the opportunity to do it. Something we would have never spent the money on pre-storm, but we had no reason not to follow through with how we wanted to do things post-storm.
It'll be fine. It was just really rough in the at least first 6 months of it, trying to figure out, okay, what do we do now? That's just part of farming, is we get knocked down, but we're gonna come back better than ever.
I mean, we're literally standing, if that barn was here, we'd be inside of it right
Exactly.
now, right? And,
Exactly.
And your house is not far away.
Right, right.
When your son comes and says, hey, the barn's gone, you got to be a little concerned about the barn, but probably more concerned about your safety as well at that point.
Right. At that point, he said, you know, we didn't know it was still strong wind, so we said we need to get back into the basement. So we went there. You know, fortunately, that was our only building. Some other buildings, some not even secured down. They weathered fine, but it just happened to catch this one and a number of trees. We had 3 large evergreen trees that it just uprooted them, and you know, they were 40 years old, and you don't replace that either. And last summer, the barn was just laying here in a pile for quite a bit of the summer. It wasn't until about this time last year that we buried it. So for a few months, it was just laying here, and the time came when we moved it and buried it. It was like it was time to move on. And I think that's just a great lesson in life. You know, you come in a difficult situation, and yes, you deal with it, face it, the difficult thing, and have a grieving process, and then it's time to move on. And so to me, it was kind of an illustration of how to deal with life as well. I very much see myself that way, of trying to see the positive in a difficult situation. And something happens in your life you had no control over, you know, you have a choice. You can react negative and feel sorry for yourself, or to think that why did this happen? And yeah, it's okay to have a time of that, but to stay in that state is just not healthy. And we have choices. You know, you can choose to be positive, and it doesn't take any more energy to be positive than it does negative.
And now we're in the reconstruction phase. A lot of it's been completed, but we still have some folks whose barns were totally demolished that they're currently rebuilding, and retired the old barn and put a new barn up. So it's still ongoing, the impact. But rebuilding is always a major concern. There's additional costs. You can't insure for replacement value, so there's some additional economic impact on our producers. And some of them, you know, on the other hand, there were others whose buildings were reaching a retirement point, but now have the opportunity to put modern new facilities in and upgrade their facilities. So there's always a positive side to some effect on some of those instances.
We're pretty resilient people. We live in South Dakota, so you got to think that our ancestors got kicked out of every decent place there was to live. I was just thinking, man, that is a lot of work. Really, I mean, I was concerned for the cattle was my first thought. I mean, we were finding pieces of my tent at my neighbor's 1.5 miles as the crow flies. It was just really interesting to see the power of Mother Nature at its worst.
We fed in like a rundown barn for 6 months on half of it, where that one half of the roof was still there. Everything inside, our conveyor, everything was kind of mangled and bent, and so things that normally would take an hour and a half would take 3.5, 4 hours. So that just cuts into everything else.
I like to describe myself as a lazy farmer, because I'm always trying to find new ways to innovate. We had a complete automation process in the works, where commodities would self-load into the feed wagon and deliver, and mainly just have to be around to monitor the situation and monitor the cattle. That came to like you say, like a screeching halt at that moment. And immediately, chores took a lot longer. There was so much work and so much cleanup, and it was my wife, one nephew, a couple 5- and 7-year-old kids, and a payloader and a skid loader, and weeks of cleanup, and even still to this day, I got the brush mower out through my shelter belt north of my house, and I was digging out pieces of steel and barn roof from there. I would love the day when I could go around this place and not find some sort of carnage from that storm now over 1.5 years ago.
on a local level, a number of farmers and neighbors that came over, people we have great relationships with, came over that in a couple days it was. The storm happened on a Thursday, and on Saturday a number of people came because we had branches and trees that were down just all over the yard. And they were, hey, how can we help? It was just a huge blessing that they took their time, time away from their family and their own personal life to come in to help.
Castlewood was one of the ones that kind of got,
Yes.
pretty
Yep.
they got hit pretty hard.
They did. Their school got hit hard, and they're just towards the end of wrapping up the school year. How are they going to finish? And so for that community, it was very traumatic, and for kids to have a change in their schedule, but also a change of how are they going to do school. It can be very traumatic, and yet there too, the community, the people, they just rallied together and support each other, and privilege of living in rural America where people care about each other and want to be involved in each other's lives. Unless it affected them personally, it was a flash in the pan type thing, a news story made front page and it's gone. But yes, a lot of people I know lost grain storage facilities, the entire thing, and it affected their crop year. Its harvest, they weren't able to get everything completed to fixed or built again for harvest. And so it was a real inconvenience, but also a huge financial drain for them as well, and the stress of that as well. Farming is a stressful occupation the way it is, and then when you have a catastrophe like that, it's even more so. It adds to the stress.
The first clue, you look at the night before, dew points, which is your measure of water, way up, temperatures way up, and a healthy low pressure system pushing these thunderstorms forward. It's forcing them to eat. And it's just a self-perpetuating machine. It just goes and it races across the environment, pulling down these high winds that usually are safely up in the atmosphere. But if you have a powerful thunderstorm, it'll bring those winds to the surface, and you can get 100, 110. There's been recordings of 120 mile per hour winds. Ask Iowa 3 years ago, who had their corn crop completely flattened through the eastern portion of the state. These are powerful systems, and all it needs is the right ingredients.